Before we dive into this chilling tale of betrayal and supernatural revenge from the frozen lands of the North, make sure to hit that like button if you enjoy Norse mythology stories, subscribe to the channel for more Viking legends, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support helps us bring these ancient tales to life. Now, let's begin our journey into the dark heart of Viking betrayal. The bitter wind howled across the fjords of Nordland as I, Knut Haraldsson, stood at the edge of our family's modest pier, watching the merchant ship disappear into the grey morning mist. The weight of the leather pouch in my hands felt heavier than any sword I'd ever wielded, its contents clinking softly with each gust of wind that threatened to tear it from my grasp. 40 pieces of silver and 20 of gold, more wealth than our family had seen in 3 generations, all gained through the most unforgivable act a son could commit. My father, Harold the Honest, had earned his name through decades of honorable trading and fair dealing with neighboring clans. Where other men resorted to raids and bloodshed, he built relationships, earned trust, and provided for our family through wit and integrity. His weathered hands had taught me to carve runes, to read the stars for navigation, and to distinguish between the songs of different seabirds that could guide a lost sailor home. Those same hands now bore iron shackles, carrying him toward the slave markets of Miklagard, Constantinople, where Norse warriors were prized as gladiators and laborers. The morning had begun like any other. Father had risen before dawn, as was his custom, to check the nets and prepare for the day's work. I found him mending a tear in our fishing net, his fingers moving with the practiced precision of a man who had spent 60 winters perfecting his craft. The silver in his beard caught the early light filtering through our dwelling smoke hole, and for a moment I almost wavered in my resolve. "Knut, my son," he had said without looking up from his work, "the Eriksson clan has requested a meeting about the timber trade next month. You should come with me. It's time you learned the deeper arts of negotiation." How those words had stung, knowing what I was about to do. Father had always spoken of passing his knowledge to me, of ensuring our family's prosperity would continue through the generations. He spoke of honor, of the importance of keeping one's word, of how a man's reputation was worth more than all the gold in Midgard. Yet here I stood, about to destroy everything he had built for the promise of immediate wealth. The Slavic merchants had arrived 3 days prior, their longship heavy with exotic goods from the eastern rivers, furs from the far north, amber from the Baltic shores, and silver from lands so distant their names sounded like whispers from the spirit world. Their leader, a shrewd man named Yaroslav, had eyes like a hawk sizing up prey, and he had quickly assessed what each member of our small coastal settlement might offer. When his gaze fell upon my father, I saw something change in his expression. Harold's reputation had preceded him even to these foreign shores. A man known for his honesty, his knowledge of secret trading routes, his connections with dozens of clans, such a person would fetch an extraordinary price in the right market. Yaroslav had approached me privately that evening, his breath reeking of fermented mare's milk and foreign spices. "Your father," he had said in broken Norse, mixing in words from his own tongue, "he worth much gold in eastern markets. Honest men rare, they bring high price from those who need trustworthy servants." He had produced a small leather pouch, letting me feel its weight, letting the coins inside sing their seductive song. "You help us take him, we share profits. Enough gold to buy your own ship, your own crew. Become Jarl of your own destiny." The temptation had been overwhelming. For months, I had watched younger men return from successful raids, their ships heavy with plunder, their arms adorned with silver rings and gold torques. They built halls, attracted the finest women, commanded respect from all who met them. Meanwhile, I remained the son of an honest fisherman and trader, destined for a life of modest prosperity and unremarkable achievement. That night I had lain awake listening to my father's steady breathing, imagining the life I could build with such wealth. A magnificent longship with carved dragon heads and painted shields along its sides. A crew of fierce warriors bound to me by oath and silver, raids across the whale road that would make skalds compose songs about my deeds, the daughter of a jarl for my wife, bringing dowry and political alliances that would elevate our family's status for generations. The plan had been simple in its cruelty. I would tell father that the merchants wished to discuss a private trading arrangement at dawn, away from the village, where curious ears might overhear valuable information. Father, trusting as always, had nodded and agreed to meet them at the secluded cove beyond the pine grove. He had even thanked me for arranging what he assumed would be a profitable business opportunity. When we reached the meeting place, 6 armed men emerged from the tree line. Father's eyes had widened in understanding, just as the first warrior struck him with the pommel of his sword. As my father collapsed, his gaze found mine across the small clearing, and in that moment I saw something die behind his eyes. Not just consciousness, but the last remnant of faith he had held in his only son. "This is how legends begin," Yaroslav had whispered, as his men bound my unconscious father. Not with honor and patience, but with bold action and the courage to seize opportunity. He had pressed the gold into my hands, its weight both lighter and heavier than I had imagined. "Use this well, young wolf. Build something worthy of the price you have paid." Now, as I stood alone on our pier, the merchant vessel had vanished entirely into the mist, taking with it not just my father, but the very foundation of everything I had known. The village behind me continued its daily routines, children playing between the houses, women preparing the morning meal, men discussing the day's fishing, all of them unaware that Harold the Honest would never again walk among them. I had prepared my story carefully. Father had decided to travel with the merchants to explore new trading opportunities in the eastern lands. He would be gone for months, possibly years, but would send word when he could. Some might wonder why he hadn't said goodbye personally, but Harold was known for his impulsive decisions when good business beckoned. The lie would hold, at least for a while. But as I turned to walk back toward our family dwelling, now mine alone, I felt eyes upon me. Not human eyes, something else. The ravens perched along the tree line seemed to watch with unusual intensity, their black eyes glittering with what might have been intelligence or judgment. In the distance, thunder rumbled across clear skies, and the wind carried sounds that didn't belong to any earthly storm. I shook off these superstitious thoughts and focused on practical matters. The gold would need to be hidden carefully while I planned my next moves. I would need to contact shipbuilders in the larger settlements, find craftsmen who could construct the vessel of my dreams. There would be warriors to recruit, oaths to be sworn, partnerships to be formed. The transformation from fisherman's son to Viking lord would require careful planning and bold action. Yet as I reached our door, something made me pause. Carved into the wood above the entrance was a protection rune my father had placed there years ago, meant to ward our home against evil spirits and ill fortune. The carving seemed somehow darker now, its lines appearing to twist and move in ways that hurt to look at directly. For a moment, I could have sworn I heard my father's voice carried on the wind, but when I strained to listen, there was only the sound of waves against stone and the distant cry of gulls. That evening, I sat alone by our hearth, the leather pouch of gold pieces spread before me on the rough wooden table. Each coin caught the firelight, throwing dancing shadows on the walls that seemed to take shapes of their own. I counted the payment again and again, planning how best to use this blood money to build my future. The ship would be magnificent, 60 feet of sturdy oak with space for 40 oars and a crew of seasoned raiders. I would commission the finest craftsmen to carve intricate designs along her hull, perhaps depicting great battles or mythological creatures. The crew would be crucial to my success. I would seek out displaced warriors, younger sons of jarls, with no inheritance but their skill with weapons, and ambitious men like myself who desired more than the lives their fathers had lived. With the right combination of silver and opportunity, I could gather a formidable band of followers within a season. But as the night deepened and the fire burned lower, strange sounds began to reach my ears. Footsteps on the path outside, though I had seen no one approaching. Scratching at the walls, as if invisible claws were testing the strength of the wood. Whispers in languages I didn't recognize, carrying words that made my skin crawl, despite their unintelligible nature. Each time I investigated, opening the door to peer into the darkness, I found nothing but empty pathways and the normal sounds of a sleeping village. Sleep, when it finally came, brought no peace. My dreams were filled with images of my father's face at the moment of betrayal, but twisted into expressions of supernatural rage and sorrow. I saw him standing in chains before Eastern buyers, his dignity stripped away as foreign hands examined him like livestock. I witnessed him laboring under harsh overseers, his proud back bent beneath burdens no honorable man should bear. And through it all, his eyes held mine across the dream space, filled with a disappointment that cut deeper than any blade. I woke before dawn, my clothing soaked with cold sweat despite the warmth of the dying fire. The gold still sat on the table where I had left it, but something about its appearance had changed. The coins seemed tarnished now, their surfaces reflecting light in ways that created disturbing patterns, faces twisted in anguish, hands reaching up as if drowning, eyes that followed my movement around the room. The following day dawned grey and oppressive, with low clouds that seemed to press down upon the earth like a burial shroud. I had spent the morning attempting to maintain normal routines, checking our nets, organizing father's trading goods, preparing simple meals, but everything felt hollow and strange. The very walls of our dwelling seemed to whisper accusations, and more than once I caught myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see my father's disapproving gaze. Word had begun to spread through the village about Harold's sudden departure. Esther, the wise woman who served as our settlement's healer and keeper of old knowledge, had visited twice, her pale eyes searching my face as if trying to read something written there in invisible ink. Each time, her questions grew more pointed. Strange that Harold would leave without speaking to Gunnar about the fishing partnership they discussed. She had mused during her second visit, her gnarled fingers tracing patterns in the dirt outside our door. Stranger still, that he would miss young Ingrid's wedding after promising to provide the ceremonial mead. I had crafted responses to each inquiry, maintaining the story of sudden business opportunity and my father's impulsive nature. But Asta's knowing look suggested she suspected something beyond what I was telling. The old woman had always been perceptive about matters others missed, and I found myself avoiding her penetrating stare. By afternoon, I had decided to begin converting my gold into more practical resources. The shipbuilder Eric Ironhand lived in the next settlement south, a day's walk along the coastal path. His reputation for crafting the finest vessels in 3 kingdoms was matched only by his willingness to work with anyone who could meet his prices. I carefully selected a portion of the gold, concealing the coins in a smaller pouch that wouldn't draw unwanted attention, and prepared for the journey. The walk to Eric's settlement normally took me through some of the most beautiful country in Nordland, rolling hills covered in deep pine forests, crystalline streams that danced between moss-covered stones, and meadows where wildflowers painted the landscape in brilliant colors. But today, the familiar path seemed changed in subtle, disturbing ways. Shadows fell at wrong angles, creating shapes that resembled crouching figures or reaching arms. Birds sang in harmonies that sounded almost like human voices, though I could never quite make out words. The very air felt thick and oppressive, as if a great storm approached from beyond the horizon. I pressed on, telling myself these impressions were merely the result of guilt and lack of proper sleep. But as the hours passed, the strangeness only intensified. I began to hear footsteps matching my own pace, though when I stopped to listen, silence followed immediately. Twice I glimpsed movement in my peripheral vision, tall figures that vanished the moment I turned my head. The wind carried scents that didn't belong to any natural forest. Exotic spices, burning incense, and underneath it all, something that reminded me of old battlefields where the dead had lain too long under the sun. When I finally reached Eric's settlement as evening approached, I found the shipbuilder working late in his yard, using the last of the daylight to shape a massive oak timber. Eric was a man of few words, but great skill. His powerful arms and scarred hands, testament to decades of wrestling the finest ships from raw wood and iron. He looked up as I approached, his weather-beaten face showing mild surprise at my unexpected visit. "Young Knut," he rumbled in his deep voice, setting down his adze. "What brings Harald's son so far from home at this hour? And where is your father? I haven't seen him at the seasonal gatherings lately." I repeated my prepared story about father's trading journey, watching Eric's expression carefully for signs of suspicion. The shipbuilder listened without interruption, occasionally nodding, but his eyes remained thoughtful in a way that made me uncomfortable. "So you've come to commission your own vessel?" Eric asked when I had finished explaining my purpose. "That's ambitious for one so young. What manner of ship are you envisioning?" I described my plans in detail. The length, the crew capacity, the decorative elements I desired. With each specification, Eric's eyebrows rose slightly higher. Such a vessel would require not just significant gold, but months of work from multiple craftsmen. It was a ship worthy of a successful jarl, not a fisherman's son who had never led so much as a single raid. "This will be expensive," Eric warned, scratching his grizzled beard. "More gold than most men see in a lifetime. Are you certain your father's trading ventures have been so profitable?" I produced the pouch of coins, letting Eric examine them by the light of his forge. The shipbuilder's expression grew increasingly puzzled as he studied the foreign markings and unusual silver content. These were not the type of coins typically seen in Norse trading, but rather the exotic currency of Far Eastern markets. "Slavic silver," Eric murmured, turning one coin over in his palm. "Very pure, very valuable. I've only seen its like a few times, usually carried by merchants who deal in specialized goods." His eyes met mine across the fire. "Your father must have made some very unusual trading connections indeed." I confirmed that father had indeed been exploring new markets, hoping my voice conveyed more confidence than I felt. Eric accepted my explanation, but something in his manner suggested he would be asking questions when next he encountered other members of our community. Still, business was business, and he agreed to begin work on my ship within the month, provided I could deliver half the payment immediately. The journey home took place under a starless sky, the clouds so thick they seemed to swallow all light from above. I had hoped the successful meeting with Eric would ease some of the guilt and strange sensations that had plagued me since my father's departure. But instead, the darkness seemed to press closer around me with each step. The familiar path became a maze of shadows and uncertain footing, forcing me to feel my way carefully between the trees. It was near midnight when I finally saw the lights of my home settlement flickering in the distance. But something was wrong. Too many torches burned in the central square, and I could hear voices raised in urgent conversation. My heart began to pound as I realized the entire village seemed to be awake, gathered together as if responding to some emergency. I approached carefully, staying to the shadows until I could understand what had drawn everyone from their beds. What I saw made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. In the center of the square stood a figure I recognized, but could barely comprehend. My father, Harald the Honest, apparently returned from his journey to the eastern markets. But this was not the father who had left with the Slavic merchants. This Harald stood perfectly still, unnaturally upright, his clothing hanging in tatters around a frame that seemed somehow diminished. His skin had taken on a greyish pallor that was clearly visible even by torchlight, and his hair, once silver with dignity, now appeared white as fresh snow. Most disturbing of all were his eyes. They held no recognition, no warmth, no trace of the gentle intelligence that had always been his most distinctive feature. As I watched from concealment, the gathered villagers began to approach the returned Harold with questions and expressions of joy at his unexpected homecoming. But their celebration quickly turned to unease as they realized something fundamental had changed about the man they had known all their lives. "Harold, my friend," called Gunnar the fisherman, "we had not expected you back so soon. How went your business in the east?" The figure that wore my father's face turned toward the speaker with mechanical precision, its movements lacking any trace of natural human fluidity. When it spoke, the voice was recognizably Harold's, but emptied of all emotion and warmth. "The business was concluded," it said, each word falling like stones into still water. "I have returned to settle certain accounts." Old Asta stepped forward, her wise eyes studying the returned man with obvious concern. She raised one gnarled hand as if to touch his face, but stopped just short of contact, her expression growing troubled. "There is something different about you, Harold," she said softly. "Something that speaks of far places and dark bargains. What happened to you in those eastern lands?" The thing wearing my father's form turned its empty gaze toward the wise woman, and for a moment something flickered behind its eyes. Not life, but a kind of terrible awareness that made several villagers step backward involuntarily. "I learned the true price of betrayal," it said, and though its voice remained emotionless, the words carried a weight that seemed to press down upon everyone present. "I discovered what becomes of trust when it is sold for silver, and now I have returned to collect what is owed." As if drawn by some invisible force, the creature's head began to turn slowly toward my hiding place among the shadows. Though I remained perfectly still, pressed against the rough bark of an ancient pine, I felt certain it could see me, could sense my presence despite the darkness and distance between us. When its gaze finally found mine across the crowded square, I saw something in those lifeless eyes that made my soul recoil in terror. This was not my father returned from slavery, somehow escaped or ransomed back to freedom. This was something else entirely, something that wore his flesh, but served masters far darker than any earthly trader. And it had come home with purpose that would not be denied or deflected by any earthly power. The assembled villagers, sensing the unnatural tension in the air, began to disperse uneasily to their homes. They cast worried glances over their shoulders as they departed, clearly disturbed by their interaction with the changed Harold, but uncertain what action they should take. Within minutes, only the creature remained in the square, standing motionless beneath the flickering torches, like a monument to something terrible and inevitable. I remained hidden for what felt like hours, watching as my father's form stood without moving, without appearing to breathe, without showing any sign of life beyond its unnatural ability to remain upright. Just as I began to consider whether I could slip away unnoticed to some distant hiding place, it spoke again, its voice carrying clearly across the empty square. "Come home, my son," it said, still not moving but somehow projecting its words directly toward my concealment. "We have much to discuss about the price of gold and the cost of honor. There are debts to be settled and accounts that can no longer remain unbalanced." Oh, with movements that seemed to flow rather than walk, the creature began making its way toward our family dwelling, never hurrying but somehow covering ground with impossible speed. I had no choice but to follow, my legs moving against my will. Drawn by compulsion, I could neither understand nor resist. As we walked through the darkened village, I noticed that every door bore fresh protection runes carved or painted since my departure that morning. The wise woman had clearly been busy, preparing the settlement for something she had sensed approaching. But I suspected her precautions would prove insufficient against whatever power now inhabited my father's flesh. The creature pushed open our door without touching it, and I followed into the dwelling that no longer felt like home. Inside, the carefully hidden gold I had left behind was now arranged in neat piles on the table, each coin reflecting the firelight with unnatural brilliance. The thing that had been my father took its place on the opposite side of the table, its dead eyes studying me with patient malevolence. "Sit, Knut," it commanded, and though its voice remained my father's, the tone carried absolute authority that brooked no disobedience. "We have much to discuss about your recent business transactions and their consequences. I learned in those final terrible hours before dawn that some betrayals echo across realms beyond the mortal world. The thing that wore my father's face spoke of hell's domain, where the dishonored dead serve eternal sentences, and of how certain transgressions draw the attention of powers that exist beyond human understanding. It told me of Loki's amusement at my treachery, and how that dark god had decided to reward my cruelty with gifts I had never imagined. The gold I had gained would remain mine, along with wealth beyond counting that would flow to me from sources I dared not question. I would indeed build my magnificent ship, gather my crew of warriors, and achieve the fame and power I had craved. But the price would be eternal service to forces that existed in the spaces between life and death, carrying out tasks that no living man should ever be asked to perform. My father, or what remained of him, became my constant companion, serving as hell's representative in the mortal world. Together, we would seek out others who had committed similar betrayals, offering them the same terrible bargain I had accepted. Some would refuse and face immediate retribution. Others would choose as I had chosen, trading their souls for temporary power and joining our growing company of the spiritually damned. The ship I eventually built was indeed magnificent, crewed by men who had made bargains similar to my own. We sailed the northern seas, not as simple raiders, but as collectors of supernatural debts, serving purposes that extended far beyond mere plunder. Our reputation grew quickly, but it was a fame that brought terror rather than respect, whispered in dark corners and feared by those who understood the true nature of our cargo. Years passed, and I achieved everything I had dreamed of when I first held those silver coins in trembling hands. Wealth, power, fame, fear, all of it was mine in abundance. But in the quiet moments between raids and battles, when I looked upon my father's hollow eyes and remembered the man he had been, I understood the true cost of my ambition. The wise woman Asta had been right to carve protection runes and warn the villagers of approaching darkness. But some evils cannot be warded against, because they arise from choices made in human hearts. The greatest monsters are not those that emerge from dark forests or deep waters, but those we create when we choose gold over honor, ambition over love, and power over the bonds that make us truly human. This is my tale, told from the cold waters of the northern seas, where my ship still sails, carrying its cargo of the damned toward shores that exist beyond any earthly map. Let it serve as warning to those who would betray their blood for silver, or trade their souls for the promise of earthly power. Some prices, once paid, can never be refunded, and some bargains bind us for all eternity. The ravens still follow my ship, as they have for countless seasons, and their cries carry messages between worlds that mortal ears were never meant to hear. Thank you for joining me on this dark journey through Norse mythology and the consequences of betrayal. If this tale of Viking treachery and supernatural revenge resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories from the frozen north. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world who share a passion for ancient legends and mythological tales. Until next time, may your choices be wiser than young Knut's, and may you never forget that some prices are too high to pay, no matter how bright the gold may shine.